Hello, and welcome to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science, where we're going to take a look at the reintroduction of cheetahs to India and ask the question whether they are racing home and or running towards disaster. So like many of these ethical dilemmas in science, they're based at least in part on a recent news account. And so even though it's been debated within India and discussed for over the past decade, it's finally reaching the international news in the summer of 2022. Now, the Asiatic cheetah has been extinct from India for 70 years now, at least 70 years. And so there is an interest in importing African cheetahs from Africa and reestablishing a population of cheetahs in India. So before we talk about what's going on with the reintroduction of cheetahs into India, I wanted to talk a little bit about the cheetahs themselves. Now, the cheetahs are a large feline predator, so a large cat that is the fastest of the land animals, capable of sprinting up to about 75 miles per hour when they're pursuing their prey, basically when they're trying to capture their lunch. Now, in the wild, they tend to be very difficult to study because they tend to be very secretive and they also move around on a very wide range. Now, the fact that they move around within this wide range makes it very difficult to protect them in conservation efforts. It's estimated that within Africa, about 76% of their range is going to be outside of protected land, so outside of preserves, national parks, areas like that, where they're at least under some level of protection. If we take a look at the kind of historic range on the slide, we can see that in the gold, it extended throughout much of Africa as well as the Persian Gulf region and throughout southern Asia. Now, its current range, indicated in black, is located within North Africa, Central Africa, and South Africa, with a limited population of Asiatic cheetahs that are found in one location within Iran. Now, if we take a look at the cheetahs, again, we can see that their range has been very restricted and they're found in only a small subset of where they would be normally found historically. Cheetahs are listed on the IUCN Red List as being vulnerable at this point. So we can see vulnerable up here kind of at that middle point here. But they're recognized as being critically endangered, kind of at the highest level of concern throughout North Africa and Asia. Now, there's an effort right now looking at the fact that there are only about, estimates vary between about 6,500 and 7,100 cheetahs alive worldwide. And over a 15-year period from about 2000 to about 2015, at least Zimbabwe saw about an 85% reduction, 85% loss of the cheetah population from about 1,200 to about 170. And so it is very, very limited in terms of the amount of cheetahs that are alive today within the population. If we take a look at kind of the historical status of cheetahs within India, the first thing we can recognize is that the word cheetah itself comes from Sanskrit, basically translating to the equivalent of the spotted ones. It's been described, and I found references to this. This is an image that I found on the internet, so it's got to be true. But I can't verify it, but it appears, or at least it's been labeled to show a spotted feline predator, basically a cheetah, on cave paintings, prehistoric cave paintings within India. Now, they disappeared in India in 1940 and were declared extinct in 1952. Now, within India, as in other regions where we would normally find the cheetahs, there are a number of factors that are putting cheetahs at risk. First and foremost is going to be prey loss. So basically the food that they would be searching for in the wild has been lost either to human hunting or to the loss of habitat. And so humans moving into a region, developing the land either for putting villages, houses, or in many cases agricultural uses. And so disrupting the prey, the food for the cheetah, as well as contributing to habitat loss for the cheetah. And so less areas that the cheetah can roam safely. In addition to that, the development of roads and cities can kind of isolate the cheetahs and make it difficult for them to move around within their range. Other concerns associated with survival of cheetahs in the wild, concerns about livestock loss, cheetahs attacking because they are a large predator, so farmers hunting the cheetah to protect their livestock, as well as, especially within Africa, a lot of illegal trafficking of live cubs and adults that in many cases are not surviving during the transport process. Now, if we take a look at cheetah conservation, there are a wide range of efforts involved with trying to protect and preserve the cheetah population, at least within wild animal parks, national parks, refuges, protected areas. And so we can see things like the Africa range-wide Cheetah Conservation Initiative, and that's an initiative that also looks at African wild dogs. Over here on the right-hand portion of this, I couldn't find a good logo for this, but there's a Conservation for Asiatic Cheetah project. This is working with that small population, the remaining population of Asiatic cheetahs in a national park within Iran. And this is an effort organized by the Iranian Department of Environment, UN Development Program, as well as a variety of other international NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and conservation efforts. In addition to that, there's the Cheetah Species Survival Plan. This is what we would see within the United States, an effort to establish a long-term healthy cheetah population in North America through kind of preservation of them within zoological parks, within wild animal parks, and then using funds obtained from basically visitors going to these parks to observe the cheetahs to support conservation within the wild. Now, one of the main concerns with cheetah conservation is the fact that there is such a small number of cheetahs that are present alive today. And so there have been a number of efforts, again, related to that cheetah species survival plan that I mentioned on the previous slide, to do captive breeding of these cheetahs. And so this is a 2019 Proceedings of the National Academy of Science article where they're discussing improvements to the captive breeding program. So, roughly 15, 20 years ago, cheetahs were breeding, but the cubs often would not survive, and very few of them would survive to the point of being able to reproduce on their own. Now we're seeing that with better understanding, we're able to do captive breeding of these cheetahs within the wild. Now, just breeding the cheetahs is not enough. Because of that limited population, they have limited genetics and the high risk of inborn inbreeding characteristics associated with it. And so this is a 2017 article, and both of these will be linked in the comments below, taking a look at conservation genetics, this idea that they need to promote diversity of the genetics by not breeding brother sisters or closely related cheetahs to one another, to selectively pair these cheetahs in a way to kind of promote diversity, or at least promote as healthy as possible genetics and characteristics associated with these cheetahs that are being preserved within these national parks, zoos, and wild animal parks. Now, if we take a look at the reintroduction of cheetahs into India, as I said, this has been discussed in India for at least a decade, probably closer to 15 years. And so there was a proposal in 2013 to move African cheetahs into India. And at that time, the Indian Supreme Court basically issued a stay, basically said that they should not move forward with movement of the African cheetahs, that they should prioritize the relocation of Asiatic lions. Asiatic lions are an endangered species within India, and currently there's a single isolated population within Gujarat, India. There's a fear that a disease could go through, wipe out that population, and the Asiatic lions could become extinct. The Asiatic lions right now are only less than 1,000, estimated less than 700 of them in an area in a protected region in Gujarat, India. Right now, however, and over the past decade, there has been resistance from the local government to move these Asiatic lions out of their region. In 2020, though, we saw that the, again, Indian Supreme Court lifted the stay preventing the introduction of cheetahs, and so they're looking at moving these into a natural park, natural preserve, that has roughly about 740 square kilometers. Ultimately, they're going to need to expand the range that is available for these cheetahs, and in many cases, deal with a need for preservation and restoration of natural grasslands that are estimated to have been lost at the level of about 90 to 95% of their historic ranges. And in a 10-year period from 2005 to 2015, they lost about a third of these natural grasslands. Now, the argument being made is that if they are able to successfully reintroduce the cheetahs to this wild animal park, be able to allow them to roam freely once they've been established within the park, this is going to promote and support conservation efforts outside of the park as well, by contributing to the local economy through processes of ecotourism. Now, the location that these cheetahs are going to be placed in, at least initially, is in central India within the Kuno National Park. They were prepared, this national park was prepared for the reintroduction of the Asiatic lions, and in doing so, they basically relocated all of the villages within this region to outside of the park to minimize the human cat interaction that could, potentially impact their survivability. Ultimately, there's an idea of housing all four of the big cats of India, the tiger and the leopard, which are found roaming throughout various regions of India, the Asiatic lion, which is in one location within Gujarat right now, and the cheetahs, which have been lost for about 70 years. And they're the only large animal lost in the 75 years of India's independence. Ultimately, going forward, they're going to need to expand the range in order to be able to support these cheetahs, and in doing so, basically allow for them to spread more widely into the wild. Now, the criteria for the success of the reintroduction of cheetahs into India is varied. They're expecting that there will be some cheetahs that are lost. So the short-term goals are that 50% of the introduced cheetahs survive for the first year. Midterm, they're hoping to see these cheetahs reproducing in the wild and survival of these wild-born cubs for at least a year. And then ultimately, the kind of true success of this program is that these wild-born cubs are going to grow up, they're going to survive, and they're going to be able to produce offspring on their own. The program will be recognized as a failure if the cheetahs do not survive or do fail to reproduce within 5 years. Now, in preparing this talk, I saw a news account from the Smithsonian Institute. Again, these are captive cubs, but cubs as part of that species protection program were born in early October at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute. They have a cheetah cam, which I will link to in the comments below. But as of earlier this week, the cheetahs have moved out of the den and are out of the wild, out in the enclosure, so they may not be on the cheetah cam as well. Now, not all those are in favor of returning cheetahs into India, at least importing African cheetahs into India. There is a slight difference between the African cheetahs and the Asiatic cheetahs. The Asiatic cheetahs are leaner, thinner, and a variety of other kind of genetic factors, basically a subspecies without going into so much detail. So a number of people have felt that we should be focusing, or at least these efforts should be focusing on the indigenous population, the indigenous species, and striving to try to get some of these Asiatic cheetahs from that preserve within Iran, which has not been successful up until this point. And so they're arguing that this really isn't a reintroduction, but an introduction of a foreign species, these African cheetahs, into the range. Other arguments have included that the national park that they're looking at, Kuno, is a historical habitat for Asiatic lions, but not cheetahs, and so potentially it is not a natural environment for any type of cheetah, let alone the African cheetahs. They bring up those are against introduction of the African lions into this region, argue, and again, the people in support of this agree that the range for these cheetahs is very wide. It's estimated that a single cheetah could range about 100 square kilometers. And so if Kuno is about 740 square kilometers, it could only support about 7 to 8 cheetahs. And so ultimately, they're going to have to expand the range as possible. They're also arguing that a few cheetahs is not enough, that in order to have a sustainable population, they're going to need between 500 and 1,000 cheetahs to be present and established within India. And so this is going to require additional imports from Africa, as well as continued monitoring, management, and resources going forward. Okay, so this gives rise to the ethical dilemma in science for this week, where we ask the question, what are appropriate goals for species conservation? So we're focusing in on cheetah conservation at this point, cheetah introduction into a region where they were extinct previously. So what should the goal of cheetah conservation be? Should it be preservation within zoological parks around the world? We're seeing that. We're seeing the species protection program where they're able to breed and support and establish a sustainable population, but it's a population that's in a zoo, in a very unnatural environment. Should there be an effort to return these animals to protected reserves or national parks? These are closer to the wild, maybe not quite natural, but in many cases they're within protected, fenced-in regions that are going to be supported by ecotourism. So people come in to view the cheetahs in this case. They provide dollars to do that, provide money in essence, and that money is used to provide the resources, provide the protection for the animals in that area. Ultimately, should there be a goal to release these species into the wild? Is it appropriate to return the cheetahs in the wild when they know that they may have a low probability of survival? If we've only got a few of these cheetahs available that are surviving, should we be protecting them at all costs? And then finally, what should be considered in making decisions about reintroduction of species back into the wild? Should it depend on the endangered status level? Are they vulnerable? Are they endangered? Are they seriously endangered? What is the risk to them? Should we consider the likelihood of their survival within the wild? Should we consider the impact on other species? Should we consider the economic impact on that region through potential ecotourism or changing, what the residents within that area are going to be capable of doing? Or should it be something else? So that finishes up this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science. As always, please see the description below for additional information and resources and references. Thank you, and have a great week.